The European Commission has placed a ban on live imports of English pigs and pig semen. The ban was imposed after 5 farms in England were affected by an outbreak of swine fever, which has resulted in some 10,000 pigs having to be slaughtered. An investigation into the outbreak has ascertained that 4 farms are linked to the 5th, which supplied piglets to the others. While alarmed at the resurgence of swine fever, a virus that hasn't been seen in England for many years, the British government's Chief Veterinary Officer, James Scudamore, says at least the outbreak has been traced to a single source, which makes it easier to contain. He says they visited all the farms, have got them under restriction, and have taken samples from them. Besides the pigs who have been killed, stringent restrictions on movements on and off these farms are now in place on all those having contact with the original farm. These farms will have to undergo a major cleanup and disinfection program under strict rules before pigs are able to be kept there again. Veterinary officers are trying to discover how the virus emerged to cause the outbreak. There's only a number of ways it can get into pigs on a pig farm. It might come in from pig manure. It might come in by people or vehicles that haven't been cleaned properly, or waste food. Officials stress that only pigs can be affected by swine fever, and there's no danger of it entering the food chain to harm humans. The only similarity between the virus and BSE is that it can originate from feeding animals contaminated meat waste products. But James Scudamore says the pig industry has learnt much from the BSE crisis. One of the major differences from BSE is that veterinarians know what causes swine fever. They know it's a virus, and they know that it's killed by heating. All the information gathered and measures taken in England will be presented to a conference in Brussels, who will then decide whether Britain has to take any further measures before the ban is lifted. Along the India-Bangladesh border, the floodwaters that have killed more than 120 people have started to recede. But the monsoons have arrived and more heavy rain is expected soon. Relief efforts were bolstered by members of the Indian Army's Sikh regiment, and they faced a logistical nightmare. Bridges and roads have been washed away and canals flooded with silt. The flooding has left villages cut off and people marooned. Although most of the 4 million people displaced by the flooding have returned home, 70,000 are still living in relief centres. At the British Red Cross in London, attention is focusing on the next stage of the relief effort. It sends in a mobile assessment team to the area, and the battle now is against hunger and disease. The British Red Cross has launched an appeal to raise money for 200,000 of the most vulnerable victims. And with up to 6 weeks of rain still to come, there could be even more complications. One of the main problems is waterborne diseases. There's major health concerns because of the pollution of the water, lack of clean drinking water, means outbreaks of skin disease. There's deaths from malaria, fear of cholera, and people who have lost their goods and belongings in the floods. This is the British Organic Food and Wine Festival. It is an explosion of organic food products that is growing at a rate of 40% a year in sales. British consumers are turning in droves to organic food. The buying market, worried by food hygiene scares and fears over genetically modified products, has left shops and supermarkets struggling to keep up with demand. In just a few short years, this industry has become a multi-million-pound business. Everything from food and wine to natural clothing is on offer here, to a population becoming increasingly discriminating about what it eats, and more health conscious too. Those behind the Organic Food and Wine Festival say people are starting to question pesticides that are coming into our bodies. They think they're retaining that pesticide and it's affecting our health. On offer from this company, specialising in hemp food products, was the UK's first organic dairy and lactose-free hemp ice cream. Made out of crushed organic seeds, it's high in protein and low in saturated fats, a healthy alternative to the real thing. And experts in, of all things, compost wiggly wigglers, help consumers get the most out of their organic food with their special compost bin. 8,000 worms per bin get through half their body weight in waste a day, producing compost and plant food by eating their way through some very unusual foods. Despite the range of goods on offer here, the UK still imports 70% of its organic produce. Supermarket chains like Tesco are under intense pressure to respond to consumer demand for all things organic. No, it's not an unusual skin blemish, and it's not a television trick either. These apples really are branded with an image on the side. The owner of this farm in England's fruit-growing county of Kent hit on the idea of putting logos on his apples for good business reasons. It's a long and labour-intensive process. In May, when the apples are still small, the farm workers cover them in double-layered bags. These help them ripen. It's also claimed that it intensifies the flavour and there's no need to spray the apples with pesticides. In September, as the picking season approaches, the outer bag is removed. The inner waxed bag protects the apples from the late summer sun. It too is stripped off after 2 or 3 days. At this point, logo-bearing stencils are rubbed on the apples and left while they ripen off. The farmer hopes this eye-catching idea will popularise English apples. Supermarkets have already tried the idea. These logos are clearly aimed at a Hollywood party. At £1 a time, apples with logos would probably need a special occasion for most people to splash out. The white sheets on the ground reflect sunlight, helping the apples ripen. It should all mean better quality apples, with a little something extra on the skin to make you laugh. The Norfolk Broads are an age-old network of inland waterways in eastern England. It's a magnet for visitors who flock to see the wildlife and enjoy the peace and quiet of this famous wetland area. But with an estimated 13,000 boats going up and down these waterways, ecologists are worried about water pollution and damage to the banks from diesel-powered craft. This unusual craft could provide an alternative. Ra, named after the Egyptian sun god, is the first solar-powered boat on the Broads. Commissioned from Germany by the Broads Authority, it will ferry 12 passengers at a time silently and cleanly around the newly restored Barton Broad. Solar panels linked together on the roof provide the fuel to power the craft. The catamaran design reduces wash and therefore damage to the banks to a minimum. The designers say it is a marriage of science and aesthetics. Two centuries after these windmills were built, alternative energy is coming back to the Broads. And as England gets as much light as Greece during the summer, there's no danger of the solar-powered crafts running out of fuel. It's more than 150 years since the osprey stopped breeding in England. This bird was hunted to extinction by man. Now, in an effort to conserve their dwindling numbers around the world, experts in Britain are hoping to reintroduce the osprey to the wild. Very little is known about this splendid but mysterious bird. Here at Rutland Water in the east of England, they're researching the osprey's flight paths by fitting the birds with solar-powered tracking devices. Before attaching the tracking device, the ospreys, all raised in captivity, are carefully taken down from the release platforms just prior to migration. To stop them panicking, the bird handlers place a hood over their heads. The solar tracker, which comes in the form of a small harness, is then put over their wings and onto their backs before being sewn into their feathers. It weighs only a few grams, and the thread that holds it in place is designed to rot after 3 to 4 years, so the birds will not have to wear the harnesses forever. Their movements can be tracked day and night, monitored through computers and the internet. Experts also know that the birds which leave Britain do return eventually. They follow different flight paths across the world, navigate at night, and fly across oceans and deserts, stopping off along the way at safe nature reserves. But getting them to go in the first place can sometimes be a bit tedious. The birds are often cautious about taking off after living in captivity. Altogether, 10 ospreys from Scotland and England will be tracked on their transcontinental migration. There are 150,000 deaths in agriculture each year around the world. A conference intends to push for an international convention to be drawn up and ratified to try to reduce the death toll in the industry. Delegates from 22 countries attended this conference, along with international social security insurers, health and safety regulators, and labour inspectors. It's the first time all the parties have come together to tackle a common problem. Safety standards differ widely across the continents, from the small and scattered enterprises in developing countries to the highly mechanised agricultural sectors of the wealthier nations. Safety records could still be improved everywhere, but currently in Europe, Britain, France and Germany have better safety profiles. In Britain, on average, one person is still killed every week in agriculture, most commonly through transport accidents. Falls from roofs and accidents involving animals and machinery are also areas of considerable concern. With children and the elderly becoming permanent features in the farming community, often risks to their safety are overlooked. Britain's Health and Safety Executive has launched a campaign of education and risk prevention aimed specifically at children. A booklet outlining the major risks and solutions is available around the world in 8 languages, containing a directory of agencies to contact for input and advice on national safety issues. It will support the global call for international regulation of the agricultural sector, which, along with mining and construction, is still among the most hazardous occupations in the world. Visitors to this Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew had to keep their eyes peeled. Hidden among the plants are some cunningly concealed artworks. They're the work of Dale Chihuly, an American artist in glass. While some of the works blend into the background, other more monumental works dominate the interior of the famous glasshouses with their intricate shapes and vibrant colours. It was when Kew staff saw some of Chihuly's work in gardens in Chicago that the idea for this exhibition was born. Chihuly himself had long before fallen for the beauty of Kew's glass architecture, as well as its unique array of plants and trees. This was the first time that Kew had commissioned sculpture on this scale to be placed throughout the gardens. But it doesn't mean the Botanical Gardens are turning themselves into a sculpture park. It took Chihuly's team of 15 assistants 2 weeks to assemble the works throughout the gardens. Visitors should visit many times because they will be able to see these colourful works in the winter light as well as the summer sun. Inequality between men and women, reinforced by social stereotyping, is limiting the development of individuals and families and holding back the development of whole countries. This is the warning from a report by the United Nations Population Fund, the agency which monitors the world's population and the development issues that affect it. The agency's executive director, Dr. Nafis Sadik, told journalists at the launch of this report that inequality in power between men and women was boosting unwanted pregnancies, maternal deaths, and sexually transmitted diseases like AIDS. She says everything stems from the basic assumption that the role of a woman is to produce children and not make decisions. One such issue is the provision of family planning to cut the estimated 18 million unwanted pregnancies that occur each year. While criticising severe underfunding for these programs by donor countries, the UNFPA wants men and women to change their attitudes to gender, the attitudes that underpin inequality and its attendant violence against women. While education does not necessarily change men's behaviour, the UNFPA says women's education is vital to give them more control over their lives. Tackling deep-seated social and cultural practices is difficult and by its nature controversial. The UNFPA believes little progress will be made unless men and women in all countries are encouraged to confront this deepest of stereotypes. Scooping water from a hand-dug well and trekking miles with it back to the village is a daily chore for millions in Africa. Yet clean water is often to be found only a few meters underground. The problem is getting the water out. Drilling a well can cost up to £10,000. This newly developed hand-operated hammer drill can sink a well in Africa at a tenth of that price. Members of a research team at Cranfield University just outside London have designed the new tool. As the pipe is hammered through rock, clay and sand to the water below, new sections can be screwed on. All parts of the rig except the super hard drill bit are designed to be made or bought locally, removing the need for costly imported spares. And there's no patent on the design. It might take 2 weeks to drill the well depending on the depth of the water table. Then a simple hand pump like this can be fitted to provide a permanent water supply to the village. This drill has already been tested in various sites in Uganda, where the government is part funding the project. If further field trials in Uganda are successful, other countries could adopt the scheme, with its dual purpose of providing clean water cheaply and stimulating the economy. An ordinary bank in an ordinary British street. Inside, Senior Customer Services Manager Debbie Brooks chats to staff. It's all a long way from this, a remote forest in New South Wales, Australia. Yet Debbie is just one of hundreds of volunteers engaged in the Investing in Nature project. When launching the scheme, HSBC Chairman Sir John Bond said companies as well as individuals had a responsibility for the stewardship of the planet. An example of some of their work is examining turtles on a beach in Costa Rica. Investing in nature will protect plants and animals from extinction, and it will also enable volunteers to take an active part in conservation, much like these young people darting, tagging and releasing mountain lions in the rugged wilds of North America.